nature. There was a book published a couple of years ago by Adam Gopnik called Angels and Ages. He's a wonderful writer for the New Yorker magazine, their correspondents in Paris for a number of years. He lived up here on this Upper East Side. He talks about a toy store with card games and things like that on 89th Street, just at the corner of 2nd Avenue. Wonderful. He wrote a wonderful book, Paris to the Moon, of his life in Paris and observation he has made. Delightful, insightful. But in this book, Angels and Ages, he describes this observation. He makes something of the fact that both Darwin and Lincoln were born in 1806. And both had real tragedy in their life when one of their children died. Both, out of their Christian training, wondered, how can such tragedies happen in God's universe? And there's two possible answers. Either there's a God who finds this also tragic, well, three options. Either there's a God who finds this also tragic and does something about it, or I'm mistaken and I must change my attitude towards death and see it the way the Buddhist sees it, as just a normal part of existence. There's nothing upsetting about it. Or explain God away. And that's what both Darwin and Lincoln did. The reality of conflict between good and evil, life and death, joy and sorrow, needed to be removed in order to make life acceptable. And the way they went about it is that God is replaced by nature as the driving energy, as everything that's behind everything, moving along in history, etc. It's nature, natural selection. That is what creates the world, and that's what creates circumstances. And in this natural selection, there is no tragedy. It's just natural selection. And so there's a way to get rid of tragedy. And for Lincoln, it was similar. He also lost a child. And then he fought. He was the president of the Civil War, as you all know. And the atrocity of that many men dying, that many men, women, and children dying in the Civil War, fighting against each other, moved him also away from his biblical understanding of things to replace God with the notion of providence. Providence, that wonderfully rubbery concept that allows you to include everything in some kind of master plan, some kind of program that makes everything justified. And that's what we have in the 19th century as well. We have Hegel's idea of history replacing God. History has this energy that moves ahead. We have providence and nature that is an energy that moves ahead and justifies everything that happens. We have the Industrial Revolution, its work conditions, the labor unions, everything that just moves along with the time. Each thing has its own historical justification. That's a phrase from Lenin, which he used in order to explain away all the atrocities that he and later on Stalin would put on the Soviet people, on the Russian people, not Soviet, Russian people, and on the Ukrainians. 9 million Ukrainians were sacrificed for the industrialization of Russia. 60 million Russians were killed in labor camps. I remember a delightful, awful conversation I had with the mayor of Rostov-on-Don a number of years ago, when in a conference where we spoke in front of 500 teachers of the town, I dared to say that Hitler and Stalin were two nasty boys carved out of the same wood. They had done atrocities in the 20th century for their ideology. And they were both socialists, I said. And of course, over the dinner we had with the leaders of the town, mayor and his assistant and so forth, head of school and so forth, afterwards, he had sufficient of the little water drink they love to get up and punch me in the chest and say, "I don't like what you said." And I said, "What was wrong with it?" And he said, "Hitler was a fascist. Stalin was a socialist. He was concerned for society." And I said, "But factually, Hitler was a socialist as well. It's just that he was a national socialist and Stalin was a so-called international socialist." But they both said they claimed to be so concerned for society, but they both were willing to sacrifice millions in order to get the master plan imposed. So then he said, "Oh no, but people love Father Stalin. There are 20,000 people living in this town. They all remember how Stalin was so wonderful for them." And I said, "Those are only the survivors. the others have no more voice to speak. You killed them. And then he said, no, we're loved, etc., etc. You know, in last election, I won 95% of the vote. And I said, well, how many candidates were there? And he said, I was the only candidate. I'm so loved. To which I then responded, I had some friends along, so I wasn't alone. You know, he could punch me, but not do anything worse. To which I responded, well, then you never know whether you're voted for because you were loved or because you were feared. But all of this is common in the 19th century. You see, there is this scientific progress, there's this social progress, there's this political progress from monarchy and pope to democracy and multiple churches. There is this materialist progress. There is the abolition, the doing away with the God of the Bible, who urges us to always examine whether what takes place should take place or what else should take place. That's the calling we each have. All that was done away with in the name of progress, inevitable scientific advance for the improvement of mankind. And we've replaced the concern for the individual by the love for an ideology that does not do justice to people, that produces great evil because it has no restraining influence of a rational mind, of historic sensitivity, of considering most centrally the irreplaceable value of the person made in the image of God, the individual person. It's, after all, only really by persons that things get done, that wrong gets uncovered, that people, that words are spoken that stand against whatever happens to be chosen. No, the moving of God from heaven into the course of history, into the scientific progress, into whatever progressive thinking of the 19th century. You know, reading the Bible is nothing but a document of religious intention in which everybody can draw his own spiritual conclusions, etc.